Let me tell you a story about someone who should never have been found. That's how it begins, whispered like a curse, the way old neighbors in a forgotten street talk when the lights flicker and the wind rattles iron gates. And in this story, the someone is Aliyah Khan, a young woman who had no reason to fear the world until she crossed the threshold of the wrong house. Aliyah's life, at least on the surface, was ordinary. 26 years old, a teacher in a private school in Karachi, the youngest in a family of 6. Her parents had passed away within a few years of each other, and her brothers and sisters were scattered in their own homes. She often told herself she liked the independence, the silence of her evenings, the sense of owning her small, rented flat. But at night, when the ceiling fan spun in its lazy circles and the city outside refused to sleep, the silence pressed in too close. That was why she often spent weekends with her married sister, Nida, who lived with her husband and 2 daughters in a modest apartment block near Federal B. It wasn't luxury, but it was noise and warmth. It was during one of these visits that the first shadow crept in. Nida had only recently moved into that flat. She had mentioned almost casually that the unit had been empty for 7 years before they rented it. "Strange, nah?" she'd said, pouring tea. "People would shift in, stay a month or 2, then leave. The building's owner practically begged us to take it." Aliyah had laughed. "Well, lucky for you. Cheap rent." But she remembered the way her sister's smile had flickered, how she had avoided her gaze for a heartbeat too long. That night, Aliyah slept in her sister's bedroom. The bed was pushed against one wall, and Nida insisted Aliyah take the corner side. It was a habit of hers, clinging to corners, as if the edge of a wall gave her safety. The flat smelled faintly of fresh paint, yet beneath it was something musty, like water left standing too long in a closed room. Around 1:30 a.m., unable to sleep, Aliyah reached for her phone. She scrolled through YouTube, then flicked idly into Snapchat. She tested one of the filters, the playful one that released rainbow light when you stuck your tongue out. At first, it was funny, but the rainbow streak appeared not only on her tongue. It shimmered once to her right, then again to her left, as if something unseen beside her was also playing along. She froze. Refreshed the app. Tried again. The rainbow still bled out of empty air, once where her sister lay breathing softly, then where the wall should have been. She locked the phone and told herself the app was glitching. She lay back, eyes open in the dark. She could not shake the feeling that the corner of the room, her corner, was holding its breath, waiting. The next morning, over breakfast, she laughed it off. "Baji, your house has ghosts. They like Snapchat." Her nieces stared at her with wide eyes. Nida dropped her gaze to her teacup. "What?" Aliyah pressed. "Don't tell me you've actually seen something," her eldest niece whispered. "The boy." Nida shot her a warning glance, but the girl pressed on. "In that room, by the wall where Kala slept. I've seen him. He doesn't like when we hang clocks or pictures there. They always fall," her younger sister chimed in. "And he held my hands once, at night. I thought it was Amy. But when I turned, no one was there." The kitchen filled with the scrape of a chair as Aliyah stood. Her skin prickled. The air seemed heavier. She forced a laugh. Kid's imagination. But when she looked at Nida, her sister wasn't smiling. It wasn't the first time the Khan family had brushed against darkness. Years earlier, in their childhood home, Aliyah's father had returned from abroad on vacation. Their ground floor had been rented out to a divorced woman with 2 children. At first, everything seemed normal, but the woman's nightly visitors, her odd hours, began to disturb their mother. One night, when the tenant finally moved out, their father went downstairs to check the rooms. In the kitchen, he found it, a circle drawn in white powder on the tiles. A crude doll in its center, pierced with needles. When he kicked through the circle, something invisible had seized his hair, tightening around his throat, suffocating him. He had stumbled out drenched in sweat, clutching the doll in a plastic bag, whispering prayers until the grip loosened. They had cleaned the house, washed every corner, and life had gone on. But Aliyah remembered the terror in his voice when he told the story, the way he'd said, "That house wasn't just rented, it was used." Maybe, without realizing it, they had walked into another such place. By her third night at Nita's flat, Aaliyah no longer slept easily. Each creak of the building, each shuffle of water through the pipes made her nerves twitch. But it was worse when the house fell silent. That night, she dreamed of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like someone testing each plank of the floor. When she woke, the sound continued. Soft thuds from the direction of the empty living room. She sat up. Her sister still slept, her breathing steady. The thuds paused. Then, from her corner, came a whisper. So faint she thought at first it was her mind replaying her dream. But it grew clearer, syllables straining through the dark. "Don't! Stay!" Aaliyah pressed her back against the wall, her pulse hammering. Her phone lay on the nightstand. She snatched it up, turned the screen toward the corner. The rainbow filter bloomed, and for a split second, she swore it clung to the outline of a face, small, pale, childlike, hovering inches from hers. The phone slipped from her hand. The whisper became a hiss. "Leave." The next morning, she tried to convince herself it had been a half-dream, a trick of exhaustion. But when she went to wash her face, she noticed long, thin scratches down her forearm. Not deep enough to bleed much, but red, angry, and raw. She hid them beneath her sleeve. She didn't want her nieces more frightened than they already were, but Nida noticed. "What happened to you?" "Nothing," Aaliyah lied. "I brushed against the wall." Nida stared at her, eyes shadowed. "It won't stop, you know." "No one stays here long. You should go back to your own flat tonight." Aaliyah should have listened. That evening, the electricity cut out across the block. The building hummed with uneasy voices as neighbors lit candles and muttered about load shedding. Aaliyah sat with her nieces in the living room while Nida and her husband went to check on a neighbor downstairs. The candlelight threw tall, shivering shadows across the walls. Her youngest niece clutched her arm. "Kala, do you hear him?" "Hear who?" "The boy." And then Aaliyah heard it too. From the far bedroom, a faint thump. Another. Like small feet hopping once, twice. Her niece's eyes widened. "He's coming," the candle guttered. For an instant, the room plunged into total blackness. And in that blackness, Aaliyah felt a small, cold hand slip into hers. She didn't scream. Not right away. The hand was too real, too solid. She squeezed, expecting to feel her niece's familiar warmth. But the flesh was icy, the fingers stiff. The candle flared again, its flame catching. Her niece sat across the room, staring at her in horror. The hand in Aaliyah's own tightened. She turned her head, slowly, to the side. There, seated beside her on the floor, was a boy no older than 8. His skin was gray, his eyes clouded as though filmed with dust. He tilted his head at her, curious, almost gentle, and then, in a voice that scraped like stone on glass, he whispered, "You shouldn't have stayed in my corner." The flame went out. The hand yanked, and the living room echoed with a scream that made the neighbors upstairs pound on their ceiling. The neighbors thought it was a nightmare. Children screamed all the time in this building. What was one more shriek in the night? By the time Nida and her husband returned upstairs with their lanterns, Aaliyah had locked herself in the bathroom, trembling, washing her hand again and again under the cold tap, as if the chill of that grip would never leave her. Her nieces huddled on the sofa, refusing to enter the bedroom again. "It was him," the older one whispered. "The boy," but Aaliyah said nothing. She could not bring herself to describe the way his eyes had glimmered without pupils, like milky glass, or how his voice had wrapped around her name, though she'd never spoken it aloud. That night, she refused to sleep. When the power finally returned at dawn, humming the fans back to life, she packed her bag and told Nida she was leaving. "Good," her sister said simply. "Don't come back here at night." "Promise me," Aaliyah promised. But she didn't keep it. Back in her own flat, Aaliyah tried to convince herself she was safe. The rooms were bright, her neighbors noisy, the city never silent long enough for whispers to settle. She filled her evenings with marking papers, calling friends, watching silly dramas on her phone until she fell asleep with the screen still glowing. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th, she woke to find her phone camera switched on. its front lens capturing her sleeping face. She hadn't touched it. The video had recorded for exactly 8 minutes and 17 seconds. When she pressed play, she saw herself tossing slightly in sleep. Behind her, in the far corner of the room, something shifted in and out of focus, too small to be an adult, too solid to be light distortion. Once at the 4-minute mark, the figure leaned forward into the glow of the screen. She glimpsed that dust-filmed face again, and then, in the faintest distortion of the audio, a whisper slithered through the static. "Your corner now." Aaliyah threw the phone across the bed. Sleep abandoned her. She began leaving the lights on, TV running, anything to drown the silence. But silence found her anyway. In the shower, she'd hear soft knocks on the glass door, as though small knuckles rapped politely, waiting. In the kitchen, plates shifted on their own, edges clinking, until she turned to find one lying shattered on the floor. When she walked down the hallway of her flat, she always felt another set of footsteps falling exactly in time with hers. By the second week, she had stopped going to school. Her principal called, concerned. Aaliyah lied about a fever. But what excuse could she give for the dark circles under her eyes, the constant tremor in her hands? She avoided Nita's calls, too. She didn't want her sister to hear the edge of madness in her voice. But madness, it seemed, was patient. It didn't need her permission to arrive. One evening, desperate for distraction, Aaliyah scrolled through her old photos. She froze when she reached a picture from her parents' house, a family gathering taken years ago. They were all smiling, cousins jostling in the living room, and in the corner, partly obscured by a curtain, stood a boy, pale, watching. She zoomed in until the pixels broke. The shape remained, her heart pounded. Could it be the same boy? Had he always been there? Even before Nita's cursed flat? She slammed the phone shut, her breath ragged. If he had followed her from childhood, then he was not bound to walls or corners. He was bound to her. The escalation was merciless. She began to lose time. Once she looked up from her couch and realized the clock had jumped forward 2 hours, though she swore she'd only blinked. Once she found herself standing in her own kitchen at 3:17 a.m., knife in hand, no memory of rising from bed. Her neighbors began complaining too. The woman across the hall insisted she heard a child crying in Aaliyah's flat at night. Another tenant swore he'd seen a small figure in her balcony window, staring down at the street, and Aaliyah herself. Sometimes she caught her own reflection moving out of sync, a heartbeat too late, smiling faintly when her lips did not. The breaking point came on the 21st night. Aaliyah, desperate, recited prayers until her throat ached. She lit incense, sprinkled salt, called on the words her father had once used against the circle in the kitchen years ago. But the flat only grew colder. The lights flickered out one by one until only the bedroom lamp remained, and from the farthest corner of the room, a shadow uncurled itself. The boy stepped forward. His lips never moved, but his voice filled the room. "You let me in?" Aaliyah backed against the bed frame. "What do you want from me?" His cloudy eyes blinked. For the first time, his expression changed, not malice, but hunger. "I want," he whispered, "a place to stay." The lamp exploded. Darkness swallowed her. When Aaliyah woke, it was morning. She lay on her bedroom floor, her arms scraped and bruised, her throat raw as if she had screamed for hours. But what chilled her most was the closet door. She always kept it shut. Always. Now it stood wide open. Inside, hanging neatly among her clothes, was a child's school uniform, mud-stained, torn at the collar. It hadn't been there the day before. The discovery broke something in her. She couldn't fight this alone anymore. That evening, she went to Nita's flat. Her sister gasped when she saw her, how gaunt she looked. How her eyes darted constantly, as if expecting something to crawl from the walls. "I told you never to stay," Nita whispered, pulling her inside. "I didn't," Aaliyah said. Her voice cracked. "But he followed me." And then she told her everything, the video, the photos, the uniform. Nita's face drained of color. "There was a boy," she admitted, "before we moved in. He lived in this flat with his mother. She was not right. People said she dabbled in things, One day he disappeared. Police never found him. She left soon after. The flat stayed empty until we came. Aaliyah felt her stomach drop. So the boy is still here, Nita finished. Silence stretched. Then Nita gripped her sister's hand. There's someone who can help. Apir Sahab, old but powerful. He cleans houses, drives things out. We'll take you tomorrow. Relief fluttered in Alia's chest like the first breath after drowning. But that night, when she slept at Nita's again, the boy came back. She dreamed of the corridor in her own flat. The walls stretched too long, doors multiplying on either side, and at the far end, the boy waited, his milky eyes fixed on her. You'll let him throw me away, he said, voice low and trembling. Like the others? Aaliyah shook her head. You don't belong here, his face contorted. Then I'll belong to you. And suddenly he was upon her, cold hands gripping her face, forcing her eyes open. She tried to scream, but her mouth would not move. You are mine now, he whispered. Wherever you go. Forever. She woke gasping, nails dug into her cheeks. Blood on her palms. And from the corner of Nita's bedroom, in the faint glow of the streetlight through the curtains, two pale eyes watched her until dawn. The Pir Sahab arrived 3 days later. He was an old man with a cloud-white beard and eyes that seemed to have seen too much of the unseen. His assistants carried bundles of incense, jars of oil, and a thick, leather-bound book that smelled of smoke. Aaliyah watched them from the sofa, her hands trembling in her lap. She hadn't slept since the dream. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the boy's hands cupping her face, whispering into her skull. Is she strong enough for this? One of the assistants asked quietly. She has no choice, the PIR said. That evening, as the call to prayer faded outside, they chose Aaliyah's flat, not Nita's. The corner belongs to him, the PIR explained. We face him where he lives. The apartment felt colder than ever when they entered. Dust clung to the walls, though she'd cleaned only days before. The air smelled of wet soil, mold, and something sour, like old milk. They set candles in each room, one in every corner. As the flames steadied, shadows seemed to draw back, reluctant. The PIR placed Aaliyah in the center of the living room. He sprinkled salt around her chair, lit incense, and began to chant. His voice was deep, rhythmic, like waves battering ashore. At first, nothing happened. The only sound was the hiss of incense and the steady hum of his voice. Then the candles in the hallway guttered out all at once. Aaliyah's breath caught. From the darkness beyond, small footsteps padded closer. The boy emerged slowly, as if peeling himself out of the shadows. His pale eyes gleamed with fury. You bring him here, he hissed. You want him to throw me away? The PIR's voice rose, commanding, rolling in waves of power. His assistants circled the boy, casting oil that smoked as it hit the ground. The boy's face twisted. She is mine, he shrieked, pointing at Aaliyah. She let me in. She belongs. The room shook. Plates rattled in cupboards. The salt line around Aaliyah's chair trembled, grains scattering as though an unseen hand tried to wipe it away. The PIR roared a verse so loud it cracked the air. The boy screamed, body blurring at the edges, half shadow, half child. And then, impossibly, his eyes filled with tears. Don't leave me, he begged Aaliyah, voice small now, like any frightened child. Please, don't make me go back to the dark. Her heart stuttered. For one dreadful moment, she almost rose, almost broke the circle. But the PIR slammed his hand on the ground, scattering ash, and the boy was hurled backward into the corner. His scream fractured into inhuman echoes. Do not look at him, the PIR commanded. If you pity him, he will win. Aaliyah squeezed her eyes shut. But she heard the boy sobbing, heard his small fists pounding the wall as if clawing to stay, and then silence. When she opened her eyes, the corner was empty. The PIR collapsed, sweat soaking his kurta. His assistants helped him to his feet. It is done, he said at last, voice hoarse. The house is clean. He is gone. Aaliyah sobbed in relief. Nita held her tightly. For the first time in weeks, Aaliyah felt the air ease against her skin. The candles burned steady. The silence was normal again, heavy but natural, and yet, something in her chest still felt cold. The days after were easier. Aaliyah returned to school, thin but steadier. She forced herself back into routine, lesson plans, tea with colleagues, laughter with her students. At night, she slept with the lights off. No whispers came. No shadows moved. Still, sometimes she caught herself pausing at mirrors, checking if her reflection was quite right. Sometimes she thought she heard small footsteps behind her in crowded hallways, though no child stood there. But she told herself it was memory. Trauma echoing, nothing more. She clung to that belief. It lasted exactly 13 nights. On the 14th, she woke in the dark with tears drying on her cheeks. She didn't remember crying. The closet door stood open again. Inside, the child's uniform still hung, though she'd burned it after the cleansing, scattering the ashes herself. Her hands shook as she reached forward. The fabric was warm, as if worn only moments ago, and then behind her, a whisper brushed her ear. I told you. I belong to you. After that, things spiraled faster. Aaliyah began to see him not only in the flat, but outside, in the reflection of shop windows crouched in the corner of her classroom, sitting on the back seat of the bus. He never spoke in public places, but his eyes never left her. At night, he came closer. She woke to find his small hand resting against her chest. Cold but steady, as if feeling her heartbeat. Once she woke choking, his face inches from hers, his milky eyes wide with hunger. You're keeping me, he whispered. Aren't you? Terrified, Aaliyah returned to the pier. But the old man only frowned, shaking his head. I cast him out, he said. If he remains, it is not the house he clings to. It is you. Then remove him from me, she begged. The pier's expression turned grave. If he has chosen you as his vessel, child, then you are no longer dealing with a haunting. You are dealing with possession, and that cannot be undone by salt or smoke. Her stomach hollowed. Then what do I do? The peer looked away. Pray and endure. Endure she did. For weeks, months, she taught her classes, visited Nita, smiled when she had to. But inside, she was never alone. The boy whispered constantly now, sometimes threats, sometimes pleas, sometimes laughter that shook her skull. At night, she no longer knew where her body ended and his began. She would wake to find drawings scrawled on her walls in charcoal she didn't own, houses with no doors, figures standing in corners, eyes without pupils. Once, she found her students' names written across her bedroom floor in jagged script. She cleaned it before anyone could see. And then came the final night. She dreamed again of the endless corridor. But this time she was not alone. Behind her, dozens of doors opened, spilling shadows into the hall. Dozens of children stepped out, all pale-eyed, all whispering in broken voices. The boy stood at the far end, smiling now. You kept me, he said. So they come too. They want corners. They want homes. The shadows surged forward. Aaliyah screamed. Her neighbors found her the next morning, crouched in the corner of her living room, face pressed against the wall, eyes blank. When they touched her shoulder, she turned slowly, smiling faintly, whispering words none of them understood. They said her pupils were gone. Epilogue, Nita tried to care for her sister. She visited the hospital where Aaliyah sat in her bed, always facing the corner, always muttering. One day, Nita brought her niece. The little girl clutched her hand, eyes wide with fear. Ami, she whispered, Kala has a friend. What friend? Nita asked. The girl pointed. That boy. He's standing in the corner. Nita looked. Of course, there was nothing there. But later, when she closed the bedroom door, she swore she heard small footsteps follow her out. The house that waited was never empty. It never needed to be. Because once you let something into your corner, it follows you everywhere.